Flagstaff, Arizona, a place that draws hikers, campers, and travelers from around the world. Towering pines, wide skies, and trails that vanish into shadowed miles of wilderness. But beneath that beauty, there's another story, one most locals don't put into words. A story that begins, not with folklore, but with the final words of a park ranger. The date was June 14th, 1998, 2:17 a.m. A ranger station south of Flagstaff received a transmission. At first, the signal was weak, barely audible. But then, through the crackle of static, a man's voice forced its way through. It belonged to Ranger Thomas Avery. His words, preserved in official transcripts, are now all that remain of him. They're not lost, they're taken. Do not follow the drums. A moment of silence followed on the line. Then the sharp intake of breath, the sound of branches snapping in the distance. And then, something else. A scream that tore through the speaker, cut short so violently it left static roaring in its place. That was the last time anyone heard Ranger Avery's voice. The vehicle assigned to Avery was found abandoned the next morning at a trailhead near Oak Creek Canyon. The keys were still in the ignition. His ranger hat was folded neatly on the passenger seat. But the man himself was gone. No footprints led away from the truck, no signs of a struggle, and no body was ever recovered. For 12 days, search teams combed the forest. Dogs picked up scents that stopped abruptly mid-trail, as though whatever they were following had simply evaporated. Helicopters scanned the canopy. Flyers were posted, trails closed, equipment brought in from other states. Nothing. Avery had become another name on the long, growing list of disappearances tied to this stretch of Arizona wilderness. But here's the detail they never released to the public. The searchers who stayed overnight in those woods filed reports. Reports that were locked away. Men claimed to hear drums echoing through the trees, steady, deliberate, not carried by the wind. Some swore the sound came from deep in the canyons where no trail led. Others described the sudden stillness of the forest, how every bird and insect would fall silent at once, leaving only the sound of those drums. Then, he says the disappearances aren't random, and he says the silence that follows is the oldest warning his people have carried. This is not a ghost story, it is testimony. And in this series, you will hear, for the first time, the account of a man who broke decades of silence. His words carry warnings that were meant for his own people, but now they are for all of us. You're watching MindFuel. Subscribe if you want the truth others won't put to film, because this is just the beginning. The voice you're about to hear has been altered for his protection. He agreed to speak on record only once. A Cherokee elder, living less than 20 miles from where Ranger Avery vanished, and one of the first to break silence about what he says is happening in these woods. They told us to stay silent. But when your own people vanish, you can't ignore it anymore. His words are measured but heavy. He explains that the disappearances near Flagstaff are not random. They follow patterns, cycles older than the reservation lines, older than the town of Flagstaff itself. He says the warnings were passed down through generations, not as stories to frighten children, but as instructions for survival. According to him, every disappearance begins with a sign. Sometimes it's the sound of an owl calling at a time of night when owls do not call. Other times, it's the sight of a tree hollowed out from the inside, its bark split like ribs, though the wood around it still stands strong. These signs, he says, are not accidents of nature. They are markers, the kind of markers his people were told never to ignore. The forest does not take at random. It chooses. And if you hear the owl when the moon is high, or find a tree that's been opened like a grave, you leave. You don't ask questions. You don't linger. Because if you do, the silence will come next. Narrator lowers voice, as though leaning closer. He describes silence as more than the absence of sound. It is the shutting down of the forest itself, as though the living world recoils before something unseen moves through it. In those moments, Even the crickets stop. The air feels heavier, and those who don't leave, those who ignore the warnings, do not return. For years, he says, elders tried to keep this knowledge among themselves. Among the fragments collected during the search for the missing near Flagstaff, one piece stood out. A leather-bound notebook, weathered from rain, pages warped from nights spent in the open. It belonged to a hiker who vanished in 2003, last seen heading north along the Eldon Lookout Trail. His body was never found, but the journal he left behind tells a story search teams were never prepared to read. Entry, Day 3. The forest doesn't feel empty. It feels like it's escorting me. Every turn I take, I sense I'm not walking alone. I hear footsteps behind me, but when I turn, there's nothing there. No hiker, no animal. Just the weight of being guided somewhere I haven't chosen. Entry, Day 5. Found myself sketching things I can't explain. Figures between the trees. Too tall, too thin. Limbs drawn out like branches. They don't move, but they're always closer when I look again. I don't know why my hands keep drawing them, but the shapes feel familiar, like I've seen them before. Entry, Final page. I can't sleep tonight. There are 3 of them outside my tent. They don't blink. They don't breathe. They just wait. I think they've been waiting all along. Narrator continues softly, as though the weight of the entry still lingers. That was the last line. The journal ends there. No closing thoughts, no sign-off. Just a line drawn across the page as if the writer's hand froze mid-stroke. When searchers found the notebook, the tent was still standing, empty. No blood, no footprints leading away. Just the journal and the silence. We were warned. Once they watch you sleep, you don't wake up as yourself. The meaning of those words was never explained, but the elder's tone left no doubt. He believed the hiker's final moments were not the end, that something continued after the body was gone, something that did not belong to the man who entered those woods. And this is only one journal among dozens of artifacts kept in silence, evidence that the disappearances around Flagstaff are not accidents. They are part of a pattern the whistleblower insists his people always understood, but which outsiders still refuse to believe. You're watching MindFuel. Subscribe now if you want the rest of these stories. Between 1989 and 2019, over 200 disappearances were reported within 50 miles of Flagstaff. Some were hikers, others campers. A handful were rangers themselves. The official explanations are always the same: dehydration under the Arizona sun, exposure to freezing nighttime temperatures, or encounters with wildlife, bears, mountain lions, accidents on terrain that turns lethal when darkness falls. But the numbers do not tell the full story, not when the patterns repeat, not when the details don't match the explanations. Search reports describe boots found without footprints to lead away from them, campsites abandoned mid-meal, food still warm, families separated by only a few hundred feet of trail, their voices carrying through the trees until one voice falls silent and never answers again. In every case, the explanations offered by authorities are clean, contained, convenient. But testimonies from those on the ground tell a different story. One ranger, who agreed to speak only under anonymity, described what he found at a site just east of Schultz Creek. His account was written in a report that never reached the public record. The shoes were placed neatly on a log, side by side, laces tied. The tent was still up, food untouched inside. No blood, no struggle. But 30 feet away, a circle of trees stood together, each one marked with deep gouges, not random scratches. Symbols, carved into the bark, repeating. Patterns too deliberate to call animal activity. I filed the report as written. The next day, I was ordered to revise it. The words animal markings were added in red ink above my own. The ranger who submitted that testimony no longer works in the Park Service. His report, like so many others, was buried under official language that reduces all anomalies to weather, exhaustion, or wildlife. But to those who saw it with their own eyes, the story refuses to shrink into something ordinary. Animals don't carve warnings. Something else lives in those canyons. The elder's voice carries no theatrics, no attempt to persuade, only the certainty of someone repeating what has been known for generations. He insists the clawed symbols are not scratches of beasts, but markers of territory outsiders stumble into and rarely stumble out of. The silence from government channels continues. The disappearances are recorded. The explanation. The testimony you're about to hear was pulled from an audio recorder recovered near a decommissioned fire tower south of Flagstaff. The ranger who recorded it has not been seen since. His words, broken, whispered, at times almost inaudible, capture what may be the only first-hand account of the thing locals whisper about, but do not name. Patrolling a closed trail tonight, orders were to check the fences, make sure no hikers slip through. Nothing unusual so far. Just the dark, just the wind. He's alone, flashlight beam cutting across pine trunks. The trailhead sign creaks in the wind. Gravel crunches beneath his boots. He begins to hum, just a tune, low, a habit on long night walks. And then, from somewhere ahead, the same tune returns. A whistle, clear, matching his own. He stops. The forest stops with him. No wind, no insects, nothing. Even his radio, always hissing faintly, has gone dead. Only the echo of his breath and the faint whistle, now off to his left, as if whatever is making it has moved. Is someone out there? You're on a closed trail. Identify yourself. Narrator continues, now layering sound in words. Branches shift without wind. A shape moves between the trees, too tall, too thin, stepping without sound. Then another, and another. 3 figures. They hold still at the edge of his light, limbs elongated like the drawings from the missing hiker's journal. Faces pale, featureless except for the glint of eyes that don't seem to blink. He lifts his radio. Nothing but static. A low thud begins to rise from deeper in the woods, a drumbeat, faint but steady. Not wind, not water. A rhythm that tightens in the chest as it grows louder. They're circling the tower. I can't leave. If anyone finds this, don't come back to Flagstaff. Don't. The words cut off. A long scrape of something against wood. Then silence. The tape ends there. The recorder was discovered at the base of the old fire tower 3 days later. No footprints, no sign of a struggle. The ranger's patrol truck sat untouched at the trailhead. His name was added to the list of disappearances the public was told were due to hazardous terrain. But his final words remain. A warning left. After the audio from the ranger, investigators finally reached the Cherokee elder who had remained in silence for decades. He agreed to speak, and his voice, altered, disguised, carries the weight of generations. What he revealed is a story forbidden, kept from outsiders until now. Our people were warned, he begins, of creatures that feed on voices, steal faces, and walk among the living. They are not spirits, they are something else. They take the form of those who vanish. They return, not to be seen, but to lure others, to continue the pattern. He pauses. The weight in his tone is not fear, it is certainty. And he leans in, as if the forest itself might overhear his words. That is why the forest goes silent. Not because it sleeps, but because it listens. It listens when they arrive. It listens when they take. And it waits until the next person moves through, unaware of what follows. Narrator continues, weaving the account into the recorded evidence. He shows symbols, glyphs passed down through generations. Ancient marks etched into wood, stone, and bone, preserved in stories told only in the dead of night. When search teams compared these symbols with the carvings found at abandoned campsites, like the circle of claw-marked trees reported by the ranger, they matched almost perfectly. Patterns repeated, warnings repeated, messages carved into the forest itself, overlooked by the untrained eye, but preserved in history and memory. The markings are old, the whistleblower says, older than the trails you follow. They are instructions and warnings. The people who come after us rarely recognize them, and so the forest collects them, like a ledger, noting who is taken and when. The Elder's revelations send a shiver beyond the boundaries of folklore. He speaks of faces returned, of voices stolen, of shadows moving deliberately to mimic those they replace. And he warns, these are not stories to frighten children. They are survival lessons, ignored at our own peril. And once again, the recurring truth surfaces. The forest is alive in ways outsiders cannot measure. It listens, it waits, and if you step inside unprepared, it may take you too. Subscribe to MindFuel. Watch closely, because the next chapters contain more first-hand Despite warnings, despite centuries of caution, the vanishings continue. In the past 2 years alone, more than a dozen people have disappeared in the forests surrounding Flagstaff. Names and faces that briefly made local headlines, only to be swept into reports of lost hikers or accidents in the wilderness. But the patterns persist, and the stories behind the official records are far more disturbing. One family describes the last moments with their daughter. She just walked into the trees. No goodbye. We never found her pack, nothing. Just the sound of her boots fading until there was silence. Another recounts the eerie call of their missing son. I heard him calling my name from outside, but my son was already gone. I ran after him. The forest was empty. Every direction I looked, nothing. He was just gone. Overlaying these accounts, recordings from search teams, rangers, and recovered journals blend together. Faint screams that trail off into static, whispered voices echoing just beyond comprehension. The subtle hum of wind through the pines, and the occasional, unsettling rhythm of distant drum beats. Each layer overlaps, creating a tapestry of fear that is almost impossible to unravel. The disappearances are not isolated incidents. They are linked. Each one fits a pattern described by the Cherokee Elder. Signs ignored, warnings unseen, and the forest claiming those who fail to recognize its boundaries. Reports that might seem ordinary, hiker gone, ranger missing, camper lost, begin to form a map of unseen corridors, of choices made too late, and of paths from which no one returns. And through it all, the forest remains patient, watching, recording, waiting for the next steps that will vanish into silence. MindFuel subscribers already know this story is far from over. Stay with us as we continue to uncover the testimonies, the journals, and the evidence that authorities hoped would stay buried. Because each new account brings us closer to understanding what has haunted Flagstaff for decades, and what continues to haunt it today. As this chapter of testimony draws to a close, we return to the Cherokee whistleblower. His voice, distorted to protect his identity, carries the gravity of generations who were told to remain silent. His final words are both warning and revelation. They told us to say nothing, but you needed to know. When the forest falls quiet, don't look for who's missing. Leave, because the one calling you back isn't them. The screen fades slowly to black, leaving only the weight of silence behind. No images, no distractions. Just the truth lingering in the mind of anyone watching. Statistics remain etched in memory. 23 people reported missing in Flagstaff's forests since 2015. Only 4 have been found. The rest remain as silent witnesses to a forest that records, waits, and chooses. This is MindFuel. Subscribe to uncover the untold stories, the testimonies kept from public view, and the mysteries that continue to haunt the wilderness of Flagstaff. And remember, some places in these forests are not meant to be entered. Some voices are not meant to be answered. The forest is listening.